I went to my mother and she was like, hey, I can't afford those shoes. Here's what I can afford. I didn't have enough money to sustain me for probably a month.
It takes that one generation to really change the trajectory of a family tree. It's an example of how one little thing can take a full company down.
My accounts, they weren't growing that much, but I had a major event happen with my car. I think the house has been paid off for 4 months. This has been the best, this has been the best 4 months of my life so far.
What would you do if life knocked you down, not once, but over and over? Job loss, a DUI, new baby, and barely making ends meet. Most people would give up. But today's guest turned those setbacks into the foundation for financial freedom. He went from mowing lawns to get some Air Force Ones to building a debt-free life, serving in the military and setting his family up to retire before 50. In this episode of Simply Money, we sit down with a millennial who didn't just dream of financial independence, he hustled for it. His story is raw, real, and full of lessons that will inspire you no matter where you are on your journey. Let's dive into how he ditched debt, overcame personal struggles, and found financial peace. You don't want to miss this. All right, so welcome back to Simply Money. Today we have Brandon with us. I want to introduce him. I shared a little bit prior to him coming on, but right now, just let's get started. First of all, thanks for being here, Brandon. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, a little bit of your background?
I'm excited to be on the channel. Name's Brandon. A little bit of background. Grew up in the suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I went to the military, served in the service. Well, first I did a stint in college, and I wasn't ready for college. After that, I had a family and did a stint in the military did some service, got my head together. Went to school, finished school at Cleveland State University. That's pretty much me in a nutshell. Now I'm working for Amazon. So it's been a roller coaster and I love the ride.
Nice. Well, first of all, thanks for your service as a fellow Air Force veteran. I appreciate that. And laugh a little bit when you said you weren't ready for school. I know that feeling. When I was in the Air Force, I was taking some classes, got married, and then I actually started back to school. In my first class, I got an F because I'd continued my same high school study habits, and that wasn't really good. But that changed a lot for me because I realized I was paying a lot of money to fail.
Me as well.
It changed things. Yeah. All right. So tell us a little bit about what was, the biggest financial lessons you've learned kind of in your journey of life. Like one thing, if you could say, that really has taught you something.
I guess the biggest lesson, the overall arching lesson that I've learned with money, you live within your means. I think like young, growing, you don't really balance your sheet right. And then you have to go back and correct all your errors. And so I think the biggest overarching thing I've learned through my journey with money is just living within your means. No matter, I've made a little bit of money, I've made more money, but each step along the way, the biggest lesson I learned is just live within your means.
Did you find yourself throughout, your young adulthood, kind of what they call lifestyle creep, when you did make more money, we spend more?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And then not caring about the debt that I was carrying from not making money, then getting money and just being like, there's more. How about a nice car? Or, I want this outfit or something. So, or, hey, let's take this trip. Without really pulling myself out of the hole that I was just in. So absolutely, lifestyle creep is a real thing that I've experienced.
Yeah, and it's hard enough when you go from not making as much and then you increase your lifestyle with the money, but it really sucks when that income goes the other way and you've increased your lifestyle and then you have to try to figure out how am I going to deal with this? And that's where a lot of people end up, getting cars repoed, homes repossessed, or foreclosed. So yeah, that's a tough thing for people to deal with.
Um, growing pains, money growing pains.
Yeah, and sometimes really difficult ones for people to get out of. Um, if you could describe your financial journey in one sentence, you kind of talked about living within your means. What was your early experience like with money? As a kid growing up, one of my favorite books is Psychology of Money, and it talks a lot about your environment, your upbringing, and that formulates how you think about money. What would you describe your early childhood and upbringing and early exposure to money being like?
So my early exposure to money, I can think of many different things. I grew up in a home with my mother and my stepfather. We were not very well off. So a lot of the things that I experienced with money were like money pains. One in particular, uh, very early in life, I wanted some shoes. And the school I was going to, shoes were just important. So I wanted some shoes. I went to my mother and she was like, "Hey, I can't afford those shoes. Here's what I can afford." Uh, I got those shoes and to school I was laughed at. I understood that not everything comes when you want it to come. So what I decided to do was we had a lawnmower, so I decided to cut grass. And I cut grass. I got When I cut one person's grass, I had different people in the neighborhood ask me, "Hey, can you cut my grass?" And cutting grass was like $20 for a yard back then. So I understood that I have to work to get what I want in life. So I cut grass, I got my shoes, and then as the lesson continues, my mother saw me making money. So it was, "Hey, I'm driving you around to cut these grasses. Let's talk about your expenses. I got gas for the lawnmower. I got this. You need bags." So that's the one defining point that I would say I started to learn about money and what goes into money.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, learning that money, doesn't just come to you. And even when you do work hard, there's, you know, expenditures that have to go out. I remember teaching the boys and it was, the dad tax. Um, they may be in the back seat and I hear them opening something and I'd reach my hand back. That's, you got to pay dad his tax because I paid for that food that you're eating there,
Yeah,
buddy.
yeah, tax box.
Um, yeah, so I think that that's a great lesson. Obviously made a big impact on you. It's funny because I remember a story. I'll show my age and my great style. This was, early 80s. My parents would give us back to school, would go get, our clothes. And this was back in the day, would go to JC Penney and they had the corduroys for like, I don't know, they were like $10, I guess. I don't know. It's been so long, but they were, super inexpensive for back then. Those were the, discount places to go. And when I got to a certain age, my parents were giving me liberty, "Go pick out your own clothes. We're not gonna pick them out, but this is how much you get to the beginning of the school year." And I came home with a pair of parachute pants. And I know you can only imagine me wearing parachute pants, but they basically cost everything that I had. And my dad was like, "Those are awesome. I hope you like them because you're gonna be wearing them every day." And so it made me realize, okay, yeah, it'd be better off to wear the corduroys that do the going down the hallway than it would be wearing the cool, I say that very carefully now, but the cool parachute
Yeah,
pants,
that was your
because
first.
the one
That's your
that fit
first
in.
experience with a budget, right?
Yeah, it was. It's my first, like, okay, yeah, I can't just spend it all in one sitting.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's funny. And those lessons kind of stick to you in some ways they don't, in other ways they do, because I obviously grew up and didn't always stick to my budget as a young adult either. And it took some further lessons, life lessons. The best education is life.
Absolutely.
So uh,
Truly agree. I carry that lesson with
it
me
was,
with that lawnmower. I carry it with me like, "Hey, you gotta get up and work. You gotta do something if you want to."
yeah. Now, would you say that, that's a defining point for you, understanding in your relationship with money? Is there a moment, that changed your life though? And that was obviously a positive kind of formulating your understanding of how you get money, you get the things you want in life. But is there a time or a moment that just like changed your life positively or negatively that money had to do with it?
Um, I would say losing a job. Like
Okay.
that put into perspective that I didn't have enough money to sustain me for probably a month and a half. So losing that job and then having a wife, having kids, and having to hustle and bustle and get another job so that the bills didn't go backwards. That was one of the like defining moments for me was like, you got to better care of yourself. And this is not sustainable. Like, so it was definitely losing a job. Absolutely.
Now, as a man, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic or anything, but as a father, as a husband, how did that impact you emotionally?
Emotionally, I felt like crap. Like it was like you were put in a position to lead your family. Um, so by leading your family, why didn't you have things in place for a fallback? Why didn't you have, why didn't you think 3 steps ahead instead of only thinking about what you're doing right now? And, the naive part of me being young was, I'm going to make money forever. I'm going to do this forever. It's always going to be good. Save money. Yeah, I got a little bit of savings, but I'm, the checks are coming in. I get up and go to work every day. That's all I was concerned about. It was go to work, make the money, pay the bills, and keep floating. I didn't think 6 months down the line, let alone a couple years down the line.
And as a young man, did you kind of have the attitude of, hey, if I lose my job, oh, I'll get another one. No big deal. Like I can just go do it. And if I have to work 2 jobs, I can do that.
I was willing to work at
Um,
McDonald's. I had an okay job at the time, but I was willing to, hey, I can go get another job. I'm in my early 20s. Who cares? That
right.
you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. It's, as I've gotten older, I see, been through some of that myself and, that not being prepared, just thinking, yeah, I don't want to lose a job, but if I do, just get another one tomorrow. And, different markets, different things happen. And sometimes that can make that really difficult. And if you're not prepared, and then you're not able to land another job, that could be another one of those devastating financial setbacks. So, um, so you said you had some savings. You didn't have any kind of like plan, like contingency. Here's my, if I lose my job, emergency fund or anything set up at that time. Do you think that mentality of, oh, well, we're getting government assistance, no big deal, like you said, take advantage of the system, whatever. Do you think that was part of your upbringing or the environment? Or what do you think kind of put that in you to think that way at the time?
I would say that it was more of adolescence, being young and dumb. I didn't understand the American money system. Um,
Right.
I didn't have. This is why college wasn't a thing for me at the time because I didn't have all my tools. I saw individuals on welfare and on other things that they were living just fine. So I think it was just me focusing on now and not getting a plan for later. I was just, this is where I'm at now. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to stick with it and, roll the dice.
Now, is that what led you to the military?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had, it's probably the prototypical military story. I didn't have any guidance. I had my uncle who was in the Air Force. He was one of my uh, role models at the time. He was gone and he was like, call a recruiter. It's time for you to do something. So
Yeah. Sometimes
hard times.
hard times put us into good
Yeah,
places.
absolutely.
So would you mark that as, a financially stuck time, like a time when you just were like, "Oh my god, I'm stuck and the military is my way out." That was kind of your escape hatch?
Absolutely. No, that wasn't the first financial mistake I made. I still had a lot of growing to do, as far as like educating myself. and educating myself on good debt, credit, all those other good things. But yeah, that was what drove me to the service.
And you say it's not the first mistake you made, and I'll probably say it won't be the last one you make either. I'm almost 56, still making them. It's a learning process, so. Um, all right, so what is the worst money advice that you've ever received? So you kinda have your upbringing, you have your environment, you have your adolescence, kind of, I'm young, I'm just gonna do what I see others doing, but you started getting money advice along the way. What would you say is the worst advice you ever got?
You can't take it with you. That was probably one of the worst advices I've ever had with money. Um, Another thing, um,
Well, before you go on, when you say you can't take it with you, how did that impact you? And I think it's obvious, but I just wanna clarify for maybe some people miss it.
you can't take your money with you, live paycheck to paycheck. Um, why, for instance, student loans. I didn't finish school. I had some student loans. Hey, you don't have to pay that back right now. It's going to be there till you die. I don't know if anybody else has ever heard that. Like, student loans are going to be there till you die. Don't worry about it. Or, hey, you want something? Just go get it. You're working hard. You can't take it with you. Go get it. So that was like a really bad advice at the time.
Kinda like the YOLO, you only live once, and go ahead and spend it all while you can. And did that give you kind of a positive or a negative outlook to money?
I don't know if I knew enough, to be honest. Um, I don't know if it was negative or positive, but it was uh, detrimental even if I didn't know it. You know,
Right,
it
right.
was very detrimental. I had young kids, new marriage. It was detrimental to have those like type of thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you don't have to be cognitive of the damage it's doing, just that it's your mentality, it's your process, the way you do things, not realizing the detriment of it. I think that's a good point for people who, there are habits that you're doing financially that you don't realize the impact it's having, positively or negatively. And learning those, that's why I'm real big. The whole reason I started this panel is to try to help people to understand the power of money and to learn financial literacy because we're really in a illiterate financial society. We get a lot of misinformation and or lack of information.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And then, sometimes it's no fault to our parents or to you know. I've learned as a father that like sometimes you're so focused on like go to work, do this that sometimes it goes to the wayside. Like, oh, I got to teach my daughters should be in on my finances. They should be knowing what's going on because I don't want the cycle to keep going.
Yeah, that's great. That's not on our questions here, but um, have you really spent time with your daughters teaching them budgeting and maybe not investing, but just the concept of money, some of the literacy maybe you didn't have growing
Oh,
up? And
absolutely. I would say right now with my kids, we even tell them about investing. When we made a big financial decision to like pay off the house, we sat down and say, hey, what would you guys do? Would you pay off your house or would you put this money into an account that could, if our interest rate is 5 and we can put it in an account for say 7 or 10 or 15, what would you do? Hey, you have this allowance, hey, you can put some money up for a rainy day, or do you want to spend it all? So we kind of like ask them open-ended questions and guide them through it so that they can start thinking about like, okay, what's my outlook? And they've seen their accounts grow. And that's a beautiful thing. I think when you're first teaching a child or, an adolescent, it doesn't click to them until they see their like accounts grow or they see their wallet get a little bigger. Then they're like, wait a minute, you were right, Dad. So
yeah, when they see the money working for them, like, hey, I put X number in and I get X times 2 out or whatever. and I didn't have to do any work for it. It was working for me. I think that's a great lesson early on because especially for kids and adolescents, that's just part of the processes that so gratify me now. You did it. You wanted your Air Force Ones. I wanted my parachute pants. They want their iPhone. Um, so we all go through that. So I think that's great that you're doing that. Now you had mentioned, and I kind of interrupted you. You were saying that you can't take it with you, and you're talking about another major kind of life lesson or impact that you had with money. And I don't know if you still remember where you were going
Yeah,
with
so
that.
it was bill collectors calling after,
Yeah.
you know, carrying some credit card debt. And then let me digress a little bit. So in the service, I realized that I was going to get a pension or retirement for the service. So I really didn't have to put too much up. That kind of played a part into it too. I do think with young men and women in the service, sometimes it's like I'm gonna get this money. I don't have to put it up. That's a little bit of different story. But when I started to talk to people about finances, I realized like, oh my goodness, I got debt. My credit score is low. I think I was trying to buy a house. I couldn't get a house. So then I started trying to pay off my debt. And then I realized like I got a hole to get out of. So that was like
Okay.
a big thing that I had to realize was like, when you start paying off your debt, your past things kind of haunt you when you want to go make big life purchases and things like that.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great point, and we talk about it a lot on the channel. Is the debt, the shackles that it puts on your life. And I hear a lot of people get comments all the time. Well, I don't have any money left over at the end of the month to invest. And that's why I push so hard. Like, let's focus on your debt first. Don't worry about investing right now. You're not getting anywhere as it is. So let's put that aside for a year, 2 years, even 3 years, whatever it takes. Let's focus on getting that debt paid off if you're that strapped. And then when that debt's paid off, think about all the money that's going to your debt that can now snowball into investment. And, if you're starting off from scratch and you don't have any debt, that's fine. Obviously, start investing. Or if you have minimal debt and you have some left over and you can manage both. I'm not a, die hard. You have to get debt paid off, then invest. I think if you have a 401k with a match, if you're able to pay off your debt and get that match, that's free money, 100% return like that. Let's do it. So I think that's, a great point too. Get that debt paid off is a big thing, and having debt collectors call you is a little humbling
Oh my
experience,
goodness.
I'm sure as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And then, when you watch channels like yours or you start to read books, you realize like, all right, I can't take it with me, but I don't want to leave negative on my kid. And
Yeah.
then, hey, then it turns into I want to leave something for my children. So when you start to get down the path of correcting yourself, it can be a daunting task at times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize that truly one generation can create generational wealth. It takes that one generation to really change the trajectory of a family tree. I'm not talking dollar type wealth, but you can, like you said, not leaving debt. I see people all the time. A loved one passes, and they're scrambling just to be able to pay the debts they have, the funeral cost, or whatever it may be. Let alone that change that could be. Now my kids or my grandkids have a head start. And I think even more so in today's world where there aren't pensions and Social Security is kind of, a little rocky. Um, you know, Having that wealth transfer can be great. And I use wealth very loosely. A lot of people say, I'm not free. People think of wealth because social media has really trapped us with wealth. You got your Lambos and, your mansion. That's just sick wealth, and a lot of that, what you're seeing are people renting crap and trying to pretend they're wealthy. You get on TikTok, want to get their big roll of money like they're balling or whatever, and, yeah, a lot of it's just a facade, and we all think, wealth of, you know, Jeff Bezos level wealth, But wealth is the freedom to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, getting financially free and not being strapped. If you want to work, great. I'm not saying, oh, work for evil, but if you don't want to and you don't have to, that's wealth.
I totally agree. I think now that I know about money, anytime I do see like my friends, I'm not on social media just because it bogs me down with those. But if my friends send me something where somebody's fasting money, that you can ask them, the first thing I say is, well, that's stupid. That $100 is going to be worth 92 next year. 93, what is it? Inflation 7? 93 next year. That needs to be moving. I wouldn't have all that cash. So yeah, it's different, different thoughts and money. And when you really, watch things and read, you realize that, some things aren't the smartest to do.
Yeah, and that's something I've thought about doing on this channel is watching some, like, TikToks of, like, bad money advice and kinda sharing, like, why that's bad and the danger of it. Actually have a video dropping Saturday, so 2 days from when we're filming this. So it'll be out when you watch this, is on Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, very popular book, but he pushes real hard the whole arbitrage, use debt, 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 debt. And, a lot of people get in big trouble with that.
Absolutely. I've seen it work, but only on like, social media and stuff. I've never known somebody who leverages all their debt. And not, I don't know everything about money. I'm sure there's different schools of thought, but the school of thought that I was pushing, and that individuals around me have helped me realize is a school of thought where forget the debt, forget getting a percentage off of the money that you're borrowing. That may work for people, but I'm too stressed. I don't like stress. And like going to the casino, just for me, it may work for other people, but I just like peace of mind, and peace of mind helps me sleep at night.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people miss is finances is a mathematical equation,
but they forget
they
the
forget the
emotional
emotional
equation.
equation.
And there's a
And
lot
there's a
of
lot of
value in
peace of
Yeah,
mind.
yeah. I won't be a
Waking up,
billionaire because I don't take risks, but I will be. There's another, like you said, wealth doesn't have to be $1 billion. I can be, wealthy just off of, for in my mind, not having any debt, being able to move how I want to move, going to work, and being like, I have to work. And I want to work, but that's my peace of mind. I think they call it FI now, financial.
Yep, FIRE, financial independence, retire early, or FI, just financial independence. It may not be early, but if you get there, you get there. And that's the thing too, back to what you said about taking advantage of the system when you were younger with government assistance. I don't think a lot of people realize, like, bankruptcy, like, I'm gonna arbitrage, I'm gonna leverage all this property to get cash flow, and then something happens, and maybe you're protected in an LLC or something, you've done it well to protect yourself, but you're defaulting on loans, and somebody's paying for that. And I think it's a lot of danger there, and people get a lot of misinformation. I'm not saying I'm not a don't have any debt, it's evil type person. I avoid it, and I try to help people avoid it. But I think you can have some debt. It's when you're leveraged. Like, people talk about, okay, I'm gonna buy this house, and as soon as it has 50K in equity, I'm gonna take that 50K and buy another house. So now you have 2 houses that are completely full 0 equity, and if the market tanks and the banks recall that, now you're upside down and dead in the water.
I'm a
So I
doomsday
think that
prepper when it comes to money.
yeah, and I've kinda gotten that way the older I get, especially. See a lot of doomsday headed my
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. I try to. I always think about the negative, and so I just try to stay away from.
Yeah. And I think as a husband and a dad, I know, I got life insurance when I was younger. I always wanted to make sure, like, if something happened to me, I think that's a tragedy for the family to deal with. My boys having to deal with the loss of a dad, my wife losing the partner, and then, the co-income. that in itself is hard enough, but then having to deal with finances. So that was something that was really big on me when I got a little bit older, was like, I want to make sure if something happens to me, I can at least take that burden off of them. And, getting financially free is part of that as well. So is there a specific book or podcast or mentor that's changed your financial mindsets? Something that, like I mentioned, Psychology of Money is one of my favorite books, just because it really helped me realize some of my mindset toward money. I got to a point, you mentioned you can only, or you can't take it with you, so you may as well enjoy it. I kind of got infiltrated with, money can be evil. The rich people are evil. If you seek money, it's, the root of evil type mentality. And so I wasn't like opposed to having some money, but I was like not pursuing that cushion and that wealth of independence. Kind of like you, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I just get it and enjoy what I have. Whether I had a lot of money or not didn't matter. It gave me a mindset that money's not really a good thing. Was there a book or podcast or anything that really changed your perspective?
It wasn't a book or podcast. It was the people that God or I put around me in my life. When we met, I picked your brain about money, and so you brought a lot of different perspectives that I've never heard before. So you brought a lot of the perspectives to me that made me realize that, okay, I need to read books, or I need to do that, or I need to seek advice from others. So I've had people in my life that have come around and have interested me in money. I would say over the past 5 to 7 years, about 7 years, I've had a circle around me where, we talk about money. And I think that's a detriment in itself. If you don't talk about money with people, and you're just left to your own vices, you'll never get ahead. That's just my opinion. I think if you surround yourself with people with like minds, or, even if you have a circle of friends and you talk about money, and then you go to your other circle of friends that, maybe you're not doing too well with money, and you interject ideas, now you have two circles, and a better perspective is like broadening. So like, I think it's a community brought me to wanting to be better with money.
Yeah, I think that's great too, because money becomes a taboo subject. You don't ask people what they invest in, how much they make, how much they have, what's your net worth. Those are all like super taboo. And I think that's somewhat of a disservice, especially in a tight knit circle. Like, I'm cautious. I don't put all that out here for just general public and people. I know people that do. They're very transparent on here. They say, this is exactly how much I have, how much I spend, what I spend it on. And I think that's great that they're that transparent. I'm not comfortable with that on with the internet and, everybody listening. But in a tight knit, your family and close friends, I think that's a great thing to do to help build each other up and pick each other's brains. And, talking to you is one of the reasons why I began this channel, because I saw, kind of your excitement when you were having some things change and you were feeling good about getting some of the debt paid off and making some investments. You're probably not super excited right now with the market.
Oh, I'm
What
excited.
your
Oh
understanding?
no, I was just talking to a guy, he's a finance guy, and the first thing I asked him, which I ask every finance person, is like, pay off debt, pay off your house, or put it in something to get money off of. I ask everybody that because I kind of get a feeling of, how they feel about money. But one thing we did talk about was, if you have 20, 30 years in the market, and hopefully everything just doesn't crash and burn, but this is the time that, if you have an extra little bit of money, buy it at a discount. So I'm excited because
Yeah.
I'm getting in at a time where if I live below my means, and I have some money and I put it up, I'm excited to see what it's going to be in 10, 20 years. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm not gonna lie.
No, that's great. That's part of that whole mentality that you're built toward money and seeing the market. and long term. And you said unless the whole thing collapses and goes to hell. I tell people all the time, and I have to do this with my wife because she's a little bit more nervous as she sees things. And I understand that anxiety people get. But if the entire market collapses and all, we have bigger problems than how much money you have. That's your apocalyptic preparation. If you think about 1929, the market crashing ever, and it was bad. And I remember talking to my grandparents about it, but it still recovered. People in that time really struggled. Don't get me wrong, but if the entire U.S. market crashes, we have way bigger problems.
Absolutely. I learned from
And
you, I think from watching your podcast, the market has never dropped in, what did you say, 20 years? Like over a 20-year span, the market's never like completely dropped. So in my mind, it's like, the mistakes of, one leader, the mistakes of one leader or what somebody's doing to the market, over 20 years, it kind of corrects itself. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say, but I'm thinking that, maybe it corrects itself and I'm waiting on the correction.
yeah, that's a great plug. Throw the link up here. I did a video on that where, if you invest for 1 year, you can make a lot more money because the return can average like 30%. But you also have, I forget what the numbers are, but it's like a 50% chance that you can lose money. But as you get out to 10 years, that return averages out to about 10%. And this is using the S&P 500. And it pretty much stays 10% for 20, 30, 40 years. It's settled down. And your risk of losing money at 10 years drops to really small number. And then when you get to 15, 20 years, there's never been a 20-year period where you would have lost any money. And when people say lose money, they get the mentality I've lost all my money. If I throw 100K in 10 years, I could lose some money, but nobody's lost all their money if you're investing diversified, et cetera, et cetera.
I follow your plan indexes. I'm not really a individual guy, but indexes, mutual funding. I follow your plan and I diversify, so I'm not going to get filthy rich. But I do. I also digress. I know you talked about the current market now. I do understand that individuals who don't have 20 years in the market, this is a very trying time. So I don't want to be insensitive to that population, because
us old folks.
But it's rough. It's really rough. But,
Yeah.
I say for people who have 20, 30 years in the market, you can help out the old, my mother who's getting ready to retire. If her retirement goes down, I come up, I can, help my mother in ways, through the market. So yeah, I'm excited, but I do understand that, this is a very trying time with the markets going up and down.
Yeah, and this market gives me. I use examples from the '80s, so only the old folks kind of get it. But in today's market right now, I think a good example of single stocks, why I avoid them, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying I avoid them, and I think the average investor should avoid them. There are people who can deal with it. They can read financials, they understand markets, but most people don't. And you look at, I'll use a company is very controversial right now, Tesla. It skyrocketed because of the company, because of the reputation, because of the political environment. And then the CEO does things, whether you agree with it or not, and it's tanking. And so one person, whether the financials are good or not, can totally change a single company. I don't know what the future will be. I'm not forecasting that. I'm just using it as an example how one little thing can take a full company down. And I don't want to have to be watching every company I'm invested in. What's the CEO doing? What's their future plan? What are they investing in? What are they putting money for R&D? All of that crap you got to keep up with. An index fund, I put it in and it reshuffles itself for me. I only look at it all the time because I do this. So I'm constantly researching. I'm looking at things and getting ideas off of my own portfolio for, videos. But if I wasn't doing this, I would look at my portfolio maybe once a quarter, and that's just to make sure it's staying balanced the way I want it. Um, and that's about it. I don't care what it does. I'm kind of like you. If it's down, I'm kind of like, hey, maybe I could grab a few extra grand and throw out there.
I moved
Yeah,
from my last point where I said, you can't take it with you. When I started to change my journey, one of the best pieces of advice I got when I got out the service was set it and forget it. Put that money, put it out your check, direct deposit it into an account or direct deposit it um, into your 401k or something. Set it and forget it. Put it in the index, each month and set it and forget it. So that was where my mentality started to change a little bit.
I think that was something that I dealt with too, was learning to pay myself first. And when I say myself, I mean my future self. Putting that auto pay on and keeping that money out of these grubby fingers. Because I know my tendency, if I see that money, well, maybe this month I'll do something. Maybe we'll take a little nicer trip or we'll go do something. If I never see it, it's not my money, it's my old man's money. And so I think that's a great plan. I always encourage set up that. Um, so what's one financial habit that made the biggest difference for you? What would you say if you pick one habit, what's been the biggest difference maker?
Besides set it and forget it, I think that was the biggest difference maker. I'm not gonna lie. Um, Putting money aside for tomorrow was a big difference maker for me. And this is after I only had big debt. So this is after I paid off my credit cards. This is
Mhm.
after I bought my first home. Um, Actually, buying my first home was probably one of the best financial decisions I ever made. I was going to be a renter for life, but my wife said we need a home, so you know you get a home. So I got a home. Um, I was putting money up. The debt was gone. Credit card debt was gone, and I was just focusing on like major debt. And then after credit card debt was gone, um, it was that putting money away, living below your means, and it was just like sticking to a plan, and not wavering from it. I know I went on a tangent just there, but I've just thought about different things. But yeah, the house, buying a home because I bought a home low when interest rates were like 2%. And then I sold it when the market boomed. So that money, that's when I started to experience a little bit of financial, like my first glimpses of financial freedom was around that time.
I think that's great. There's 2 points there. One, the home. I think, not everybody can do it, and I'm not saying this for those who actually can't do it, but I think buying a home is a huge thing because it's automatic savings. It's forced savings. You're building equity, and most people don't realize that retirement, a large majority, I forget the stats, but a large majority of people's net worth is their home, and having a paid off home, I'll just throw a number out in this area here. You go rent a two-bedroom apartment, you're probably looking 1,500, 2,000, depending where you're at. I know people in California are like, "I wish." But, yeah, this is Midwest Ohio. So let's say 1,500 on the bottom end, and that's going up every year. So you get your house paid off when you go to be financially independent. That's a set expense that's no longer there, let alone increasing. So I think that's a huge thing. And then you also mentioned, paying off your debt. Now, you had credit card debt, student loans. You got that paid off. How did you deal with kind of your cars and home? What was your mentality toward that?
So I like nice cars. What nice cars? Which probably were one of my biggest financial mistakes. But um, my focus, was getting my credit cards and stuff down. And like those like little intangible debts, I got those down first. Like that was like the first marker in the checkbook. Um, and when I got those down, then I started focusing like I'm not paying interest on a lot of things anymore. more of my money staying in my pocket. Like for my car, yeah, I have a car note, yeah, I have a house note, but now I want to get rid of those. So like, I think just making that first goal of I don't want to live off credit cards, um, made me focus on I don't want to pay a car note. I don't want to pay a house note. I think doing that first made me kind of focus on getting really financially free. Later down the line, I did learn because I was a victim of fraud. I did learn the importance of, or the advantages of having a credit card and just marrying my account. So, like, how I use a credit card now is I purchase on a credit card, but I don't purchase anything on a credit card unless I have that money in my account to pay it off before the interest hits and before the interest hits or for the bills due. I talk to my friends about it. It's just like my little jab at the financial institutions because I'm getting the
Mm-hmm.
cash back. I'm getting my 3%. I'm getting that little money back, but I've never paid interest on some of my cards. And that's like my little,
Yeah, and they hate you. Yeah. Yeah, because they do the 3% because they know 99% of the people are going to pay minimum or partial, and then they'll charge them 21. They're like, oh, sure, we'll give you 3% out of the 21. Yeah, it's a big scam. So you got your credit cards paid off, and I do the same thing. Sometimes I'll actually pay with a credit card. And I'll get on my phone and submit a payment. It's just for the fun of it. I typically, about it once a week, I'll just pay off my credit card. I don't wait till the end of the month. I used to years ago, like I'd do my bills, and once a month I'd pay off my credit card before it was due, and that's where it began. And then I got to where I'm just like constantly just paying it off. The money's in the different funds that I have. Now, when you paid off your credit cards, why were you using credit cards? And if this is too personal, we can cut this
oh,
part
no, no, no. I
out.
was over
But
leveraged.
why were you using credit cards? Even though you got to a point where you're making okay money or good money, whatever you got to, but you're still using credit cards. Why was
Lifestyle
that?
creep. Absolutely. I was still like, I was better with my debt and stuff, but, it was just lifestyle creep. It was, making more, spending more, and then, oh, you want to go on a trip, put on a credit card. So it was just like, you want a computer, I get it now, versus having what my mother calls delayed gratification.
Mhm.
So, I wanted it now. I was making the money, I'll pay it off. So it was just lifestyle creep and not having that like delayed gratification.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah, I dealt with
I
that
dealt
too.
with that too. Is like I
Wanted
wanted
everything now.
everything now, but
It's something
it's
that can
something that
really
can
creep
really
up
creep
on
up on you and take advantage
your
of your, or not even take
just
advantage, just
overcome
overcome
your
your
ability to
ability to
manage it.
manage
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So you have your credit cards, you're using those, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, even though you're making more money. When you started paying them off, did you set up like an emergency fund or something to where you wouldn't have to use them again?
Yeah. So when I paid them off, I think it was talking to you and talking to some of my other mentors was when I paid it off and that was gone. So I got rid of my like smaller debts in my debt. I realized that, okay, remember when you lost your job, you didn't have any money. So I realized that I had to put money up for an emergency fund. So like my line of thinking was pay off debt, then get an emergency fund, right? Get your living expenses for 3 to 6 months. At the time, I wasn't making a lot. My wife wasn't making a lot, like 3 months. And then after you get that fund, then invest. So that was kind of like my trajectory or like my long-term goal.
Yeah, I think that's where people struggle is because you're trying to get out of that debt, and then you don't set the emergency fund up, and life happens. I always say there's things that happen around my house all the time. Just recently, maybe a few months ago, had a hot water heater go, something else went, all within like a week. I dropped like $3,500, and I'm not happy about it. I was like, oh yeah, I was waiting for this, but it becomes an inconvenience and not an emergency because I have that contingency fund sitting there. I pay it, not going into debt, not paying on it for the next 6 months or 6 years. And so I paid the cost, no interest, and then just replenish that money over time, however long it takes to replenish it. Even if you have to start investing, depending where you're at, get that emergency fund back up and then go back to investing for something else happens, or no, when something else happens, ready again. So you got your credit cards paid off. What was your approach when you basically had your cars and your house? What were you thinking at that point? Like you said, you wanted to get this paid off too. So you kind of focused on your cars.
What I did was I made extra payments. And at the time it was like one extra payment, like once a year, twice a year kind of thing.
Okay.
And to just get to your point about your hot water tank, I think a turning point to where I thought I felt good about my plan because I like my children, like I said before, you got to kind of see the money grow. When I was setting it and forgetting it, then on my accounts, they weren't growing that much. But I had a major event happen with my car where it broke down. I was driving back and forth to get to work, so it broke down. And then I realized, like, I usually would put this on a credit card. I would usually have to ask somebody for money. I would usually have to like rob Peter to pay Paul. But I got
Mhm.
this money. Called the tow truck, the Firestone, I think it was. They were like, "Hey, this is how much it cost. Go ahead and do it." And I felt so good about that that I realized, all right, emergency fund. This is why you need it because something really happened, and I had the money to do it. Um, let's get rid of all the rest of this debt. So your point, like I started making like extra payments once every 6 months, once every year to try to get that debt down.
Yeah, I think those experiences like that are really telling because when you have something happen and you're like, oh man, I got the money to do this. You don't have to sit there and finagle and juggle. And that was something that was big in my life. I grew up very uh, focused with my dad teaching me pay your bills. And that was my idea of budgeting. Even though I saw my dad over at his desk budgeting, I didn't pay attention. He didn't say, "Hey, son, sit down with me," but he did instill in me, "Pay your bills and pay them on time." And my idea of budgeting as a single adult and as a young married dad and was I got a paycheck and I was like, "Okay, what's due?" I pay them, and I made sure I paid bills, and then but what happened, I'd be like, "Oh, crap, I forgot about this." Or you have, like, 6-month bills, like an insurance bill that comes in, and you're like, "Oh, I forgot about that." And it can really put you behind or put you in a pinch. And back to your point a while ago, that stress is like, "Oh, man." And so then you're constantly in that stress mode where now it's like, I know exactly where I'm at, what's coming in, when it's due. I know my house taxes are coming up in July, and I'll pay those. And with grumbling and mumbling, I'll send the check off.
I mean, to
Um,
speak to what you said earlier, me and my wife got so ingrained with, thinking about the future, thinking about tomorrow. And, there's things that came up, with buying this house that we had to fix and we had the money for. We even thought longer. We started the process of doing a trust, just because that long term, like you said, I don't want, listen, this lines it all out. This is who's getting what. Um,
mhm.
this is what's going to happen with the money. The trust is the secondary on these accounts, so it's not going to get tied up in probate. It's not going to get tied up doing other things. This money is going to get dispersed, and this is what's going to happen. So, when I saw it happen on a smaller scale, I started thinking about bigger scale. So, just to your point, yeah.
Yeah, and a will's great when you actually have something to leave people too. Versus, Here's my will, who's gonna pay off everything?" So you've kind of hit on this throughout this time here about your approach of saving and investing now compared to the past. So is there any one take on that that you would say if you were to share with others, like how I used to save and invest versus how I do now, what would that be?
A little bit goes a long way. We're not all millionaires. And like you said, another statistic from your podcast was like, I think you said most millionaires make under $100,000 a year. So like teachers and things like that. So there's a way to spend your money in the right way. Um, so yeah, my investing before was not too worried about it, just spend it, put a little bit. Now it's, any extra. Like I try to get my budget book in like within $10 or something like that. To where I'm not
Okay.
like, this is what I need to do with my money, but I have like, hey, you put this up, you send this to this account, you send this and you invest on a stick to your plan and you invest like this. And then the extra money, hey, if you want to golf or do some other things, so be it. Just stick to this original plan.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, in golfing, you have a fund that's used for golfing or whatever your thing is. And if the money runs out of that fund, then you don't go golf. And I think that's important. That's that whole why budgeting is so important. Budgeting is not restrictive. A lot of people take it as like a straitjacket. To me, it was very liberating because I didn't have to wonder, if I spend this week, am I going to be in trouble next week? I had my entertainment fund, and I look and say, heck yeah, I can go. Let's do it. And if I didn't do a whole lot, that fund would build up a little bit more, and I could do more stuff the next month. Um, whatever the case. So those are good points. So you ended up paying your house off. What was that? What was your thought process on that? Because you said you got the house at a pretty well, that was your first house at a low interest rate, and then your new house that you've paid off was a little bit higher rate. Uh, but what was your decision making and process on that?
It was getting advice from different people. I had, um, hey, put the money in this account. Don't pay it off if you have, I was blessed. My biggest investment was in my spouse, and my wife. So marriage before biblical or before religion was a business venture, so, marriage, even though it was religious for us and it's the love and all that other stuff, um, pressure is felt easily between two people, so, just having that extra emergency person has been great. So it afforded us to pay off the house. And so back to your question, it boiled down to, okay, we got rid of most of our little debt. By this time we had paid off our cars. So what do we do? Do we buy a property, maybe invest in a property? Do we get, a property and kind of leverage that? Do we get a loan and leverage it and try to make more money? Um, do we invest this money? And it boiled down to, I'm sick of working. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the rat race. I'm just like, I don't get the same fulfillment that I got from working, even though I love what I do right now. It's very, it keeps me, my juices going, and it helps me, I have more to learn, but I'm sick of it. And the only way that I saw to be like, to lower my stress, to not feel like I had to get up every day, was to pay off the house. So I didn't care about like 3 percentage points that I was going to get by putting my money in the market. I didn't care if I made an extra $100,000 by putting my money in the market over a few years. My peace of mind was, I want to pay off this house so I don't have any bills. So all my money comes in so that if like a calamity happens, I can do something else and still pay my taxes and stuff. I just wanted that peace of mind. And my wife agreed with me, was that, hey, we were blessed to kind of get some more money coming in, a business venture worked out. That doesn't happen for everybody. I understand that. A lot of people don't have the extra money to put into a home. I totally get it. But when we got that money, and I've had my ups and downs, I had my ups and downs where I was making a lot, then didn't make a lot. Money was coming, money didn't come. So I understood that, okay, it's here now. It might not be here next year. So let's just take care of this now, get it out the way. So if it does dip, we're fine. It was the peace of mind to me. I went off on a tangent, but it was the peace of mind for me.
And do you have any regrets?
Absolutely not. I think the house has been paid off for 4 months. This has been the best, no, maybe was it four? This has been the best 4 months of my life so far.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, the first thing they go to is, should I pay it off? Will I'm paying X percent, let's just say 7%, or should I invest it and I could maybe get 10%? Um, and when you were paying yours off, if you had not paid it off and put all that money into the market, you'd be down big time right now. So that's the whole, you can't time the market, and, you're long term, so it would come back and you'd still make money. But beyond the mathematical, does it benefit me at all? You got the peace of mind, which to me is the biggest thing. But now with your lifestyle, not having a house payment, not having car payments, not having credit card debts, whether you want to, we go to number 2 is, what if I lose my job? Okay, well, now I'm in a better position as well. So that's the second benefit. But the third one that most people don't really think about is now I have choice. Maybe I don't wanna do this job that's paying X number of dollars. I can go do this job. It'll be less stressful, or maybe it's a fulfilling job. Maybe it's like a something that brings just joy and fulfillment. You feel like you're doing society good or doing something, but it doesn't pay. And the pay drop, you're like, "I can still do it because my expenses are so low." So you can get that life choice that you wouldn't have if you still had that payment on your house and your cars and credit cards, even just your house.
It was like, you know, I paid off my car last year. I think I told you I paid off last year. Um, and so, with tariffs and everything coming, we thought about getting another one. We had the house paid off, but I was really worried about like taxes. And I didn't realize, God bless my wife, her and her business partner had put money up for taxes. So I had this fund and I was like, oh, I've been saving money. I've been putting this money up. You've already been putting money up for taxes, which is a real thing. So now I did, go purchase a vehicle, but I put so much down that, the payment, I'm going to pay it off by the end of the year. So like just the thinking of money changed for me, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have, went to try to go purchase a vehicle. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, you get opportunities and, some people who are totally dogmatic be like, "Oh my god, you're debt free, now you have debt again." Um, but if you want to, you could take care of that quicker. You're still saving a large amount,
And touch my
putting in that.
savings. Like I still have,
Yeah,
I didn't go into my emergency fund. This was just like an extra fund that I had.
sure.
My emergency fund is still there. It's still a constant for, we went, believe we talked about like what to have 6 months or a year emergency fund. And then I have my money going into, well, my emergency fund is a high yield savings account. Then I have my money going into investments instead of paying the mortgage off, or I'm sorry, instead of paying a mortgage, that money that I would have been paying a mortgage on, since I'm already used to paying it, that money is going into investments, which is for me stocks, minus I figured out, how much taxes and stuff will be. Or I'm sorry, like, yeah, property taxes and insurance. That comes out every 6 months. So minus that money's going in. So this was just another fund. But, I wouldn't have had the freedom to do that unless I got completely debt free. I was saving money. I had my emergency fund and everything going on. So, that was an important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, the great feeling is, you can't put a price tag on that, and like you said, the last 4 months knowing that your house is paid, whatever happens, other than having to obviously come up with some tax money, you own that bad boy.
I think you told me when we paid it off and we made that final payment, I like kicked down my door. You're mine.
Yeah, yeah. We won't say the words I told you to say, but I own
Yeah, I
you.
own you. Yeah, it was. I don't know. I hope everybody gets a chance to get out of debt and experience that. I know it's hard. I know it's a daunting task, but our plan was like over 3 years. We didn't just like, hey, we got the money paid off. No, we, made a plan to, hey, we're gonna pay this extra. We're gonna do this. We're Our goal was like 5 to 7 years, but luckily we were able to pay it off a little early. But that was our goal, and we stuck to it. And I hope everybody gets a chance to get up and go to work and be like,
Yeah, and I may be being presumptuous here, and if I am, we can always cut stuff out. That's a great thing about these. But I've been to your house. You live in a beautiful house in a really nice little neighborhood. Um, but for a lot of people, you've you and your family have increased your income quite a bit over the last maybe 5 years. It's really gone up trajectory. Was it tempting to say, even this, as nice as this is, and, we're very happy here, we could move up to the next nice neighborhood? There's always a bigger, better house, bigger, better neighborhood. Was that ever tempting for you?
For me, for my wife, yes. I would say, the area that we live in the okay part, but there are like developments and other stuff. Like my kids go over to their friend's house and they're like, for me, I have had bad experiences with money in the past. I've had all
Mhm.
those experiences that we talked about where, you know, not knowing about the future or something bad happens. Like I've had all that before and I don't need anymore. Everybody has their own room. It's not the most glamorous house. We have a basement, we have sitting areas. I don't need anymore. And the only reason I can
Yeah.
say that is because I don't have a mortgage. That to me is worth more than coming into like a huge house. And I know we all have our vices. That's not a vice for me. It's just not. Well,
Yeah.
in my mind, I can renovate this house 10 times, if I wanted to, versus going to buy a new house. That's just my
Yeah.
my take on it.
And the other thing where people often mistake, like, you got the increase of income and you could have said, "Okay, now I'm gonna get a new mortgage and I can afford X number of dollars a month," kind of get to my max again. So now I'm back to paycheck, but look, I'm in this bigger house. Versus, like, you get your house, again, it's a beautiful house, and you got it paid off, and you could be putting money aside, and then if you want, not suggesting this, and we won't let your wife listen to this, but you could say, "I'm gonna sell this house, take its equity and this money I've been putting aside, and now I'm gonna go get a bigger house in a nicer neighborhood for, you know, this money that I have saved up in equity." And then you're still debt free, but you've moved up. And that's what I suggest people to do from the other end is don't try to buy into what I'll call the middle class home. Start at a starter home. Start at a smaller home, a fixer-upper. Not saying to go into a place that your kids are in danger or anything, but there are places you can go and get homes that aren't the biggest and best, and the payments are cheaper. Build some equity, and then get that move up. We have that keeping up with the Joneses social media mentality that really keeps us strapped paycheck to paycheck. That's why they say over 50% of people make over 100K are living paycheck to paycheck.
I just like I have I don't know if I would have had the same outlook. I probably would have went to buy a new house if I didn't have my relationship with money. That's been an ongoing changing one. Where I've seen ups and downs and I've seen all that. My stability and my peace of mind is way more precious to me than a bigger house. But that's just me.
Yeah, and you made the comment about, your kids going to neighbors' houses and all. I remember growing up, I grew up in a very modest house. Um, eh, I'll say very modest. It was very modest. But my parents paid it off. They did most of the work on it themselves, but they weren't, like, great at investing, but they were amazing at budgeting and saving, and they retired at 55 and 52. But I remember going to my friends' homes, and I was up in New Hampshire, and there was people, I mean, they have, like, 3 staircases in their houses, like, 4 stories. I mean, I'm talking some of the, like, old, mansions that have been converted, but a lot of people had money where I grew up. I wasn't one of them. I lived in my neighborhood, and then this was New Hampshire, so take it for what it is. I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. But I never thought of it that way growing up. I was happy. We did tons of stuff because my parents weren't house poor. They gave us experiences. We went on trips and did all sorts of stuff. They didn't wanna be strapped to a house. We could have lived probably not in one of those houses, but we could have lived in a bigger house, but we wouldn't have had, trips like I remember going to Disney World and spending a month traveling out west to national parks and stuff. We wouldn't have had those experiences because we would have been house
Yeah,
poor.
I will say that my daughters, they really understand that because they see their friends and their friends like, oh, you guys are going again. Where are you going? And we always tell them like, the only reason that you can go to like gymnastics and you can participate in track and all this other stuff because that we're not over leveraged. So, I totally agree. I think those experiences are, that's what I would rather spend my money on. That's just, we all have our rich life. But
Right.
that's what I would rather spend my money on, that time and that, that quality time and stuff. Now that I'm getting older and sensitive, that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and as you get even older, I have adult kids your age that they don't think about, "Oh, when I was growing up, I lived in this house and my friends had this house." They think about the things we did, the experiences we had. That's where the investment really is. So I think you're on the right track. And I know there's people that can afford those big houses, and more power to them. And I'm not jealous of them. I'm not maybe a little envious, but hey, congrats. But there's so many other neighbors who I've talked to people who have big houses that can't even afford to furnish them. But it's the image or the car they're driving. They can barely afford to make the payment, but they got this car. And those are things I think can really trap
Yeah,
people.
I would say I've seen it both ways. But like, your big house is your rich life and you can afford it and do all of it, more power to you. I wish I had it like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I wish
absolutely.
I had it like that. I
Yeah,
just
I'm not
don't.
and that's where the money evil mentality I had, kind of in me. They're not bad people that can afford that. Not necessarily there are bad people, but they're just because you have money and can afford those things doesn't make you a bad person, and I think that's great. And I also know people who live on $30,000-$40,000 a year who are ultra rich. Their life is full, and their experiences are just full of joy and happiness.
What more
And
can
what
you
more
ask
can
for?
you ask for?
Absolutely. My wife is
Yeah.
knocking. We're going to Mexican tonight, so I'm gonna.
Okay. I'm going to close you up here. Last question. I'll let you go. If you could tell people out there, where do you plan on being and seeing yourself in 5 to 10 years?
In 5 to 10 years, I want to. Um, that's a good question. As far as financially,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So in 5 to 10 years, I want to see my investments grow. I want to look back and say I stuck to my plan and I put money aside. I put money in my savings. I put money into investments. And I want to see my plan or my vision that I have at this stage kind of come to fruition. That would be very that would be joy. That'd be a joyful time for me. That I stuck to my
Awesome. Well,
plan over 5 to 10 years. I didn't waver from it. Even, if a catastrophe happens, I didn't waver from putting a percentage up. And I want to see that come to fruition. That's my biggest. That's what I'm looking forward to.
that's awesome. We wish you well on that, and we'll have you back on hopefully before that, but in 5 or 10 years, we'll see how you're doing. I appreciate you joining us. If you have questions for me or Brandon, throw them down in the comments below. Uh, I'll answer them if I can. If not, I'll reach out and have Brandon answer them for you. And we appreciate you joining us and sharing all those insights. I hope it helps other people. You guys go enjoy the family and that
All
Mexican
right.
food.
Just can't talk to you later.